A woman put down her mop and stopped a murder. Not a detective, not an engineer, not anyone with a badge or a title or a name anyone in that hangar knew. A janitor. While 6 experts with $1 million worth of equipment stood around a private jet they couldn't fix, she walked across the hangar floor, placed both hands flat on the engine casing, closed her eyes for 8 seconds, and heard exactly what someone had tried to hide. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a plan. And the only person who figured it out was the one nobody bothered to look at. Nobody looked at the woman mopping the floor. That was their first mistake. Zara Cole had been cleaning Hangar B for 11 months. She knew every crack in that concrete, and every shadow the overhead floods threw at midnight, and she knew, from 28 feet away, that the engine they'd been staring at for 6 hours was going to kill someone. She just had to decide whether to say so. She'd signed in at 4:47 p.m. with a nod to Gerald at the security desk. Gerald was 50-something and always had a paperback face down on the counter and never asked questions. She liked Gerald very much for exactly that reason. She grabbed her cart from the supply closet, mop. 2 buckets, 3 cleaning solutions lined up by size, a stack of microfiber cloths folded in thirds. She started at the southwest corner of the hangar, the way she always started. Work northeast, Sister Smat. Her father had taught her that. You don't clean a floor the way you feel like it. You clean it the way the floor needs. Same as his engine. Same as anything worth doing right. The rule about her father was simple. She didn't herself think about him before she shift. Think about him after. Think about him on the drive home. Think about him when you open that notebook and run your fingers across his handwriting in the dark. But not before you needed your hand steady. She broke the rule at 9:52 p.m. when she saw the Gulf Stream. The jet was in the center bay, long and white and expensive in that way that made you aware of how much space money could take up. She'd seen it come and go maybe a dozen times in 11 months. Tonight it wasn't going anywhere. She knew that before she saw the people clustered around it. She knew it from the overhead floods, all blazing at full power at 10 o'clock at night, and from the sound of voices carrying the particular edge that voices air carries when something has gone wrong and nobody knows what. She kept mopping, southwest to northeast, like always. The voices sharpened as she worked closer to the bay dividers, not close enough to be obvious, just close enough to hear. 6 men in white coveralls around the port engine housing. One had a tablet, one had a laptop on a rolling cart. 2 were having a disagreement they were working hard to keep quiet. Dr. Elliot Finch was not working hard to keep quiet. She recognized him from 3 previous times she'd been in the same hangar. Big voice, bigger ego. The kind of man who used technical vocabulary the way other men used cologne. Constantly, in amounts that didn't help anyone around. The compression staging is intact. Finch was saying not quite full volume. The fuel flow is nominal. The ignition sequence is initiating correctly. The engine is cranking and not sustaining rotation, which by any reasonable diagnostic framework should be impossible, given that all preconditions for sustained rotation are being met. The man next to him said something she couldn't hear. Finch responded, "I know what the readings say. I'm telling you what they should say." Zara mopped. She was looking at the engine housing from 28 feet away, the angle of the overhead lights, the way shadow fell across the lower assembly. Something about the silhouette of the turbine casings was sitting wrong. She wasn't sure yet, wasn't sure enough to do anything about it, so she kept mopping. Harlan Aldridge walked in at 10:14 p.m. The temperature in the hangar didn't change, but it felt like it did. He came through the main bay doors with 2 people behind him, and he walked when they've spent 30 years being the most important person in any room they entered. Not fast, not slow, just completely certain that the room would rearrange itself around him. And completely right about that. 60 years old, gray at the temples. The watch on his wrist cost more than her car, her furniture, and her entire wardrobe combined. Charcoal suit. Shoes that were dry despite the rain outside, which meant someone had pulled a car to a covered entrance for him. Finch, his voice carried without effort. "Tell me something useful." Finch straightened. "Mr. Aldridge, we've run the full diagnostic suite twice. The engine is failing to maintain rotation post-ignition, and we've been unable to isolate the causative. I didn't ask for a description of the problem. I've had the problem explained to me 4 times in the last 2 hours. I'm asking for a cause. We're working toward how long? Not a question. A measurement request. Finch hesitated. At the current rate of elimination, we could have a preliminary theory within how long? 4 hours, possibly 6. Harlan stood very still, then turned and looked at his son. Conrad Aldridge was 28 and stood with his arms crossed in a way that was trying to look relaxed and wasn't quite getting there. He had his father's jaw and his father's eyes, and none of his father's terrifying patience. 6 hours, Conrad said, like he was tasting the words and finding them disgusting. We have options, Harlan said. We charter. Everything out of hobby is grounded. Weather? Conrad was already on his phone. Ellington's got one available, but it's not rated for the weight we need, and the range is, then we push the meeting. We push the meeting and we lose the term sheet. Calloway's people made that explicit. If we're not in the room by 9 a. Tomorrow, he walks and takes the offer to, I'm aware of what he takes it to. I was in that meeting. The engineers around the engine were pretending to look at their tablets. Zara was mopping. She was 22 feet away now, getting closer as she worked the section between the equipment bay and the main floor. And the closer she got to the engine, the more wrong it looked. Not the mechanical parts, not the assembly. Something about the geometry. The angle of the turbine housing relative to the compressor assembly. A shadow that fell in a direction it shouldn't. She stopped mopping, stood there with the mop handle in both hands, looking at the engine. Her father's voice came from somewhere in the back of her mind, clear and specific the way it always was. Zara, what are you looking at? The housing. What's wrong with it? The angle's off. How far off? She tilted her head, calculated, a few millimeters. Maybe less, maybe 2. Her father's voice, and what does 2 millimeters mean on an N2 shaft at 10,000 RPM? Everything. She walked toward the engine, not fast, not slow, just walking the way you walk towards something that needs you to look at it up close before you can know for sure. The security guard on the far side of the bay saw her first. He started moving. Then one of the engineers looked up and said, "Hey," and then everyone was looking at her. She didn't stop. She walked all the way to the port engine housing and placed both palms flat on the casing. Closed her eyes. The metal was warm, not uniformly warm. Warmer on the lower left quarter by maybe 3 degrees, maybe 3.5. She tilted her head. There was something in the residual vibration pattern in the metal itself, like a chord that was missing a note. "Excuse me." The guard was right behind her. "Ma'am, you can't be here." She opened her eyes, turned around. Harlan Aldridge was 6 feet away, looking at her the way he looked at problems, directly, without blinking, waiting for them to explain themselves. "Who are you?" he said. "Zara Cole." She kept her voice level. "I clean the floors on the over rotation." Conrad made a short sound, not quite a laugh. "The N2 shaft is displaced," she said, to Harlan. Not to his son, not to Finch, not to the 6 engineers with their tablets and their laptops and their 6 hours. To Harlan, about 2 millimeters. Lateral, not mechanical failure. The shaft was moved deliberately. If this plane takes off tonight, it won't land. The sound the hangar made then was not silence exactly. It was the specific absence of all the noise that had been happening before. All at once, Finch's mouth opened. Conrad's arms came uncrossed. Harlan Aldridge stood completely still looking at her and said nothing for what felt like a long time. Then, how? The housing casts a shadow at the wrong angle under direct overhead light. The thermal distribution on the casing is asymmetric, warmer on the lower left where the offset is creating friction, or shouldn't be any. And residual vibration pattern in the metal feels different from what a shaft in true alignment produces. She paused. "You can feel it if you know what you're feeling for," Finch said. "Mr. Aldridge, this is," and stopped because apparently he couldn't decide what it was. Conrad said, "She heard us talking." "I've been the other side of that divider for 40 minutes, Zara said. "You never mentioned the housing angle. You never mentioned thermal distribution. You were focused on the electrical diagnostic." Conrad stared at her. "You were wrong to buy," she said. "That's not a criticism." The diagnostic pointed there, but the problem is mechanical, upstream of everything your equipment was looking at. Harlan was still watching her with that flat, measuring attention. "What's your background?" he said. "My father was an aviation mechanic. He started teaching me when I was 16. She stopped, then decided to say the rest. "I was in my 3rd year of aerospace engineering at Howard University when he died. I couldn't make the next tuition payment. I've been working here for 11 months. Something moved in Harlan's face. Sympathy. Something more like recalibration. If you're right, he said, what does the fix look like? I need to pull the coupling, inspect the bearing race, and realign the shaft mounting. If the displacement is what I think it is, I can do it in under 2 hours. If there's damage to the bearing itself, it takes longer. And if you're wrong, then you've lost 2 hours, and I'll see myself out. Absolutely not. Finch stepped forward. He was taller than her by 8 inches, and he used all of it. Mr. Aldridge, this is an $80 million aircraft. I have 22 years of experience in turbofan diagnostics. I am not going to stand here and watch an untrained, do you have a better option, doctor? Finch. Still not a question. Finch opened his mouth. Closed you how'd your medicine at 6 hours, Harlan said. She has a diagnosis and a timeline. He looked at Zarazar. What tools? Number 12 and 14 combination wrenches. Torque wrench calibrated to inch pounds, not foot pounds. A dental mirror, pen light, feeler gauges. She paused. And access to the maintenance records for the last 100 flight hours. The maintenance records. Conrad's voice had a new tone. Harder to read. Why? Because if I'm right about what happened to the shaft, it didn't happen randomly. I want to see if there's a pattern in the service history. She saw process that. Something moved behind his eyes. Get her the tools, Harlan said, and turned back to the group as though the question were already settled. Zara worked. The engineers watched. At first they watched the way people watch something they're not sure about and can't look away from. Then 2 of them drifted closer. Then a third. She didn't narrate what she was doing. She didn't perform for them. She worked the way she'd watched her father work, not fast for the sake of speed, not slow for the sake of carefulness, at the pace that the task actually required. Her father had a saying about that. The job sets the pace, not you, never you. The moment you start working at your speed instead of the work speed, you start missing things. She'd been 12 when he said that. Saturday morning. Their garage in Decatur smelled like motor oil and coffee, and the sweetness of WD-40 that she still, at 22, associated with the feeling of learning something real. He'd brought home an old engine block from the airport specifically for her to practice on. His hands were always steady, even when hers weren't. Zara, what are you hearing? I don't hear anything. You're not listening. Close your eyes. Put your hand flat on the block. Don't try to feel anything. Just let your hand be there. She'd tried. Then slowly, a flutter in the middle. Good. 3rd cylinder is misfiring. Not much, but enough. You feel that? How do you know? It's the 3rd. The flutter has a rhythm. Count the rhythm. Count what's between the flutters. The engine has 4 cylinders. What cycle is missing? She'd counted. 3rd. He'd smiled at her in the way that meant she'd done something that mattered. That was almost 7 years ago. She still counted things. She got the coupling loose in 14 minutes. Finch made a small involuntary sound. She requested the dental mirror. One of the younger engineers handed it to her without being asked twice. She angled it into the housing with the penlight. And there it was. She held the mirror steady for a moment, then handed both the mirror and the penlight to Finch. Look at the rear face of the bearing race, she said. Lower left quadrant. He took them, crouched, looked. The sound he made was very quiet, but everyone heard it. There's scoring, he said. There's scoring, she agreed, and the pattern isn't consistent with friction-induced wear. She paused. It's consistent with a tool contact. Something with a small radius applied at a specific angle. She let that land. That doesn't happen by accident. Finch pulled back from the housing, stood up, looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not hostility anymore. Something that had replaced the hostility when it wasn't looking. How long have you been doing this? He said. 6 years, give or take. Where did you? My father. She returned her attention to the housing. He was the best mechanic anyone never heard of. She needed the maintenance records. Conrad brought them. Not a tablet, not a printout. He brought her the actual binders from the records room, 3 of them, heavy and worn at the corners, the kind that accumulate handling over years. She went through them standing, leaning against the equipment cart, her penlight in one hand, a current binder in the other. She was looking for the thermal excursion data. She found it on the 43rd page of the middle binder, small. 17 instances over 91 flight hours. Temperature spikes in the exhaust gas temperature readout. Brief ones, 2 to 4 seconds each, 20 to 25 degrees over baseline. The notation on 12 of them was the same 3 words in the same handwriting, probable sensor glitch. She closed the binder, looked up. Harlan was watching her from 12 feet away. He'd been watching her work for the better part of 40 minutes. His expression hadn't changed much, but she thought something behind it had shifted, slightly. 17 EGT anomalies in the last 91 hours, she said. All brief, all dismissed as sensor error. She set the binder on the cart. They weren't sensor error. They were the N2 shaft running slightly off true. 17 times the engine was telling someone something was wrong. And nobody caught it, Conrad said. The person who wrote probable sensor glitch 12 times in a row caught it, Zara said. They chose not to report it. Conrad was still holding the last binder she'd handed back to him. He looked down at it. That handwriting, he said. Not quite to her. More to the binder. I know that handwriting. She watched him. That's Dex's notation system, he said. Dex Briggs. He's been doing maintenance logging on this aircraft for... He stopped. His jaw tightened. 9 years. The name dropped into the space between them and stayed there. She'd looked at the binder in his hands. Where is Dex Briggs right now, she said. She found him before anyone else did. She'd gone to the tool room for a feeler gauge, and the door was already half open. And when she pushed it the rest of the way, there he was. Dex Briggs, 39 years old, big through the shoulders, the hands of someone who'd been doing physical work since his teens. He was sitting on an overturned 5-gallon bucket with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. And he did not look someone who'd been doing routine maintenance. He looks like someone waiting to find out how bad something was going to get. He looked up when she came in. She closed the door. I'm not security, she said. I'm not going to call anyone. I just want to know who told you to log those anomalies as sensor error. He looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at the floor again. You don't know what you're walking into, he said. I know more than I did an hour ago. He didn't respond to that. She leaned against the shelving. Let the silence do the work. Her father had taught her that too. Silence is a tool. People don't like it. They fill it. Give them enough of it, and they'll fill it with the truth. Dex filled it in 43 seconds. What's up, Ray Voss? Quietly, like the name itself was something that could hurt you if you said it too loud. He runs a consulting group, Aviation Advisory. Contracts out to owners for safety audits and operational assessment. He stopped. He came to me 8 weeks ago. She waited. Sandra. He stopped again. His throat worked. My wife. Ray's people made it clear that if I didn't help them, they'd made it clear what would happen. She's never done anything to anyone in her life. Where is she right now? I don't know. I don't know. They have a number I'm supposed to call. When he looked up, his eyes were red. When the job is done, what exactly did they ask you to do? Log the anomalies as sensor error. Don't flag them for inspection. And tonight, Tonight they wanted me to compromise the fuel line. I already did it. It's a small cut on the secondary supply line. It won't show up on pre-flight, but under sustained high-pressure fuel flow at cruise altitude, it'll fail catastrophically, she said. Yeah. She stayed very still for a moment. A compromised fuel line at altitude over Texas at night, with Harlan Aldridge and whoever else was on that flight manifest. She thought about her father. She thought about what it meant when someone decided another person's life was an acceptable variable in an equation about money. Listen to me, she said. I'm going to fix the fuel line. I'm going to get this aircraft airworthy, and I'm going to document every piece of what was done to it. And while I do that, you're going to call that number right now. Tell them the job is in progress. Buy me time. Dex stared at her. If they find out, they won't find out until Sandra is somewhere safe. She met his eyes. I need time. Can you give me that? He looked at the floor, then at the door, then at her. Okay, he said. She was back at the engine in 4 minutes. But nobody asked where she'd been. They were arguing about liability. Finch was pushing for postponement. Conrad was pointing out what postponement meant for the Callaway deal. One of the other engineers was on a call with what sounded like an insurance assessor's. Zara picked up her tools and kept working. She located the fuel line compromise in 6 minutes. A thin incision on the secondary supply line, angled in a way designed to propagate under pressure, not visible to standard execution. The kind of cut that required specific knowledge of both the aircraft's fuel system architecture and the materials involved. This wasn't improvised. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had probably done something like it before. She sealed the incision with a specialized repair compound from her kit. A small tube that had been in the bottom of her bag for 8 months, that she'd gotten from her father's workbench, that she'd been carrying without knowing when she'd need it. Her father had packed one in his kit every day for 22 years. You don't know what you're going to find, so you carry what you might need. Every day, like a habit. She sealed the line, stepped back, let the compound set. Then she pulled Harlan Aldridge aside, walked him to a quiet corner near the equipment lockers, and told him everything. The EGT anomalies, the scored bearing race, the fuel line, Dex Briggs, Ray Voss. She watched his face through all of it. He was good at keeping his face still, but she could see the exact moment when it stopped being a mechanical problem and became something else. When it became personal, when it became dangerous. Ray Voss, he said. You know him. He's my external safety auditor. Has been for 4 years. He said it with no particular emotion, which was the most frightening way someone can say something like that. He had access to your maintenance records. Yes, he had access to your aircraft schedule. Yes, he knew your crew. Harlan was quiet. He's going to come here tonight, she said. When he does, it'll be because he's expecting to hear the job is done. He'll want to confirm it. She let that settle, so we let him come. Harlan looked at her. You're a janitor, he said. I clean floors, she said. And I fix engines. And right now I'm telling you that someone you trusted paid your mechanic to kill you tonight. And there's a pattern in your maintenance records that suggests this has been building for months. She paused. What you do with that is up to you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took his phone out of his jacket pocket and made one call. 3 words into it, she understood he was calling someone at the FBI field office. She went back to the engine. Conrad materialized at her elbow 20 seconds later. What did you tell him? He said quietly. The truth. Which part? All of it. He was quiet for a moment. She was realigning the shaft coupling and the work required attention, and she gave it the attention it required. Then Conrad said, still quiet, I found something in the maintenance records. She didn't stop working. Tell me, the name of the consulting firm that signed off on the safety audit that flagged your father's former employer 4 years ago. The one that put 23 weeks out of work and shut down the operation. Her hand zagged 1 second. Voss Aviation Consulting, she said. Yeah, he said. The coupling was in her hands. The metal was cool under her palms. Outside, the rain was still coming down against the roof, with the kind of persistence that doesn't know when to quit. She breathed. Put her father's voice somewhere safe where it would be there when she needed it later, and went back to work, because the engine needed her to, because someone was going to walk through those main bay doors in a little while, expecting to find a crime already committed. And Zara Cole was going to make sure he found something else entirely. Ray Voss arrived at 11:52 p.m. Zara heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps, the change in the room. The way a space shifts when someone walks into it who knows exactly how much damage they can do, and has made peace with that knowledge a long time ago. She kept her eyes on the engine. He came through the main bay doors, with 2 people behind him, and moved with the unhurried ease of a man who believed he was arriving to confirm something he'd already arranged. Expensive coat, dry despite the rain outside. Someone had pulled a car to a covered entrance for him too. Of course they had. She didn't turn around. She listened. Harlan, his voice was warm. The kind of warm that takes years to practice until it sounds like it costs nothing. I heard you were having a night. Ray, Harlan's voice gave nothing. I didn't call you. Word trolls. You know how it is. A pause. Footsteps moving further into the bay. I have a team available. They could be here inside the hour, whatever you need. We're managing. Another pause. Longer this time. She could feel him looking at her back. Who's working the port engine, he said. My people, Harlan said. That's not one of your people. She is tonight. Silence. She set down the torque wrench, picked up the feeler gauge, checked the shaft clearance on the lower mounting point with the focused attention of someone who hadn't heard a word. She'd heard every word. Voss didn't leave. That was the first signal that something had shifted in his calculation. A man arriving to confirm a job well done would check in, ask a few questions for the appearance of concern, and find a reason to be elsewhere before anyone looked at him too closely. Voss stayed, moved around the perimeter of the bay, talked to 2 of Finch's engineers in the easy, fluent way of someone who knew the vocabulary and knew how to make people comfortable with it. Making people comfortable was, she suspected, the thing he was best at. She filed that away. Conrad was near the records room. He'd been there for the last 20 minutes doing something she hadn't asked about and hadn't interrupted. He had the look of a man who'd made a decision before he fully understood what it would cost him. She respected that too much to disturb it. Dex was near the south wall. He'd made the call 20 minutes ago, stepped away with his phone, said the words "Klumba Xapak," looking like something had been taken out of him, but also like a man who'd put down a weight and wasn't sure yet how to hold his arms without it. He'd caught her eye when he came back. Small, done. She'd given him one back. Now she needed to move faster. The shaft realignment required two people. She'd known this since the beginning. One set of hands on the alignment gauge and one set making the micro-adjustments to the mounting points. Too much variance in either direction, and you introduced a new problem while solving the old one. Her father had described it once as threading a needle in the dark while someone else held the thread. She looked around the bay. Finch's engineers had drifted back toward the diagnostic station and were doing what people do when they want to look busy so they don't have to admit they've been replaced. Two others were watching her with uncomfortable mixture of skepticism and reluctant interest that she'd been reading in people's faces all night. Not them. She did someone who'd listen without adding their own interpretation to every instruction. Someone whose hands were steady and whose ego wasn't in the room. She looked at Conrad. He was walking back from the records room with a folder in his hand, moving like he had weight on his mind, but his hands were steady at his sides. Conrad. He stopped. "I need a second pair of hands on the alignment gauge," she said. "It has to be someone who can follow instructions without explaining why the instructions are wrong while we're doing them." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you asking if I can take direction from someone who cleans floors?" "I'm asking if you can take direction," she said. The floor part isn't relevant. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Brief. "Tell me what to do," he said. They were together in the specific silence of two peeps seeing something that requires real attention. She talked him through it in short sentences. He followed without hesitation. Hold the gauge flat, don't push it, let it find the surface. Feel when the resistance changes. Not looking. Feeling. He was quiet for a moment, then. "It's different how? Less resistance, like something's released. That's the shaft finding center. Hold exactly there." She made the adjustment. 1 bolt. 2. The third required more torque than the first 2, and she felt the moment it seated correctly, the way she always felt it. Not as a measurement, as a rightness. Metal telling you it's where it belongs. Her father had called it the click that isn't a click. "There," she said. Conrad held position. "Is that it? For this stage?" She straightened, checked the gauge reading, wrote the measurement in the notebook. Her father's notation system. Same as always. "We need the upper mounting next. Then I want a partial start to check the harmonic." "How long?" 30 minutes. Maybe 25. He nodded, didn't move away, stood at the engine with the gauge still in his hands, looking at the internal assembly. "My father hired Voss 4 years ago," he said. Not to her exactly, more to the engine. "I was 24. I thought it was a good decision. External safety oversight. Independent verification. All the right words." He stopped. "I never looked into who he actually was. She was checking the lower mounting torque. Most people don't." "I should have." "Yes," she said, "but that's a different conversation." He looked at her. "Right now, what finished is the engine," she said. "Everything else waits until the engine is done." He put the gauge back in position. They kept working. Voss made his move at 12:31 a.m. She heard it in the conversation he started with Harlan near the port wing. Low enough that he probably thought she couldn't hear. The acoustics of a metal hangar at night are not what people expect. Sound travels sideways and in from the walls. She heard it fine. "Harlan, I understand the impulse." "I do, but you have to think about the liability here. If something goes wrong on this aircraft after an unauthorized individual performed structural maintenance, a pause for effect, your insurance coverage becomes theoretical." "Do you understand what I mean by theoretical?" Harlan said something she couldn't catch. "I'm not suggesting she isn't capable," Voss continued. "Smooth, reasonable, every word placed where it would do the most work. I'm suggesting that capability without certification is a legal exposure your board will not forgive. You have people who count on this company. You have obligations." Another pause. "Let me bring my team in. She can stay. She can consult. But the work needs to come from certified hands." She set down the feeler gauge, picked up her father's notebook, walked to where Harlan and Voss were standing. They both looked at her. "Dr. Voss," she said. "Miss Cole." She put the notebook to the page she'd been writing on, held it so Harlan could see it without showing it to Voss. "The anomaly log I found in the maintenance records. 17 instances over 91 hours. She tapped the page. The notation handwriting matches Dex Briggs's logging signature from the last 3 years of service records. She closed the notebook. Dex Briggs was hired through your consulting group's workforce placement program." Very quiet. Voss's expression didn't change. That was the telling thing. Most people have an involuntary reaction when they're caught off guard. A blink. A half second before the mask reassembles. He had none of that, which meant he'd been caught off guard before and had trained himself out of showing it. "I don't manage the individual employment records of every person placed through our network," he said. "But you know his name. I've worked with this facility for years. I know most of the long-term crew by name. You knew Sandra Briggs's name when you called him 8 weeks ago." The hangar held its breath. Voss looked at her. For the first time, the warmth in his voice was completely gone. "That's a significant accusation," he said. "It's a description of events," she said. "Whether it's an accusation depends on whether it's accurate." Harlan was watching Voss the way he'd been watching Zara for the last 2 hours. That Sam Flat, measuring attention, now directed somewhere else entirely. Voss said, "Harlan, I'd strongly recommend you not let this continue. Whatever this young woman, how did you know about the Callaway deal?" Conrad's voice came from behind her. She turned. He was standing 10 feet away with the folder in his hand. He'd been waiting for this moment. She could see it in the way he was standing. Deliberate, not angry. "I'm sorry," Voss said. "The Callaway deal, the 9 a.m. meeting." Conrad walked toward them slowly. "My father mentioned it in front of you at a dinner 6 weeks ago. One dinner. You were the only external party who knew the full scope of what was at stake. And yet Callaway's legal team received an anonymous communication to Wamakazo suggesting Aldridge Aviation was facing undisclosed operational liabilities." He held up the folder. "I found a copy in the records room. Correspondence on Voss Aviation Consulting letterhead, addressed to Callaway's people." The room was very still now. Voss looked at the folder, then at Conrad, then at Harlan. His manner was still controlled, still precise, but the warmth was completely gone, and what had replaced it was something more honest about what he was. "Harlan," he said carefully, "we should discuss this privately." "No," Harlan said, "we shouldn't." Agent Faye Draper arrived at 12:47 m. She came in with 2 other agents, the focused energy of someone who'd seen enough crime scenes to have strong opinions about how they should be managed. She was 43, shorter than Zara had expected from Harlan's brief phone call. She had the kind of face that withheld expression as a professional practice, the way good card players withhold tells. She looked at the engine, at the tools on the cart, at the maintenance binders on the equipment stand, at Dex Briggs sitting near the south wall, at Voss near the wing, then at Zazeza. "You're the one who found the shaft displacement." "Yes, and the fuel line compromise." "Yes. And you've been working on this aircraft for," she checked her phone, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Closer to 3. Draper looked at the engine again. "How much more do you need to do?" "Partial start to verify harmonic. Then upper assembly final check. Then a full fuel system pressure test before anyone signs off on airworthiness." "How long?" 90 minutes if nothing else turns up." "You're expecting something else to turn up?" Zara looked at the engine. Then back at Draper. "The level of planning that went into what I've already found wasn't improvised," she said. "Someone who plans this carefully doesn't stop at 2 interventions." Draper took out a small notebook. Actual paper. "Pen. Walk me through everything you found, in order. Start with the initial observation." Zara walked her through it. She was thorough. She didn't editorialize. She described sight had seen, what she'd measured, what she'd inferred, and on what basis. Draper asked 3 questions. All of them pointed at the places where Zara had moved from evidence to interpretation. Good questions. "And Briggs came to you voluntarily," Draper said. "He didn't volunteer exactly. I found him in the tool room, and he told me what he knew when I asked." "Why did you go to the tool room at that specific time?" "I need a feeler gauge, and you had a feeling. I'd seen him near the fuel system earlier when he shouldn't have been, and his Lozine signature was on 17 suppressed anomaly reports." She met Draper's eyes. It wasn't a feeling, it was arithmetic. Draper made a note, looked up. Miss Cole, has anyone explained the liability implications of performing structural maintenance on a registered aircraft without— Yes, Zara said. Dr. Voss explained them thoroughly about 20 minutes ago. Something moved in Draper's face, brief. I imagine he did, she said. Voss was placed near the east wall with one agent, not in custody but not free to move around. He'd taken a phone call and been politely asked to end it. He'd complied with the grace of a man calculating his options and finding more of them than the situation seemed to warrant. He was still calculating when Zara went back to the engine. The partial start was the next step. She needed to run the engine at 40% thrust and hold it there for 96 minutes. Long enough to hear the harmonics. Long enough for the alignment to reveal whether it was correct or close to correct, which are different things. She explained this to Harlan. He relayed it to the flight crew. A pilot named Garrett, who'd been in the crew lounge since 9 o'clock, came down in his uniform, looking like a man who'd had better nights but was too professional to say so. She went through the startup checklist with Garrett. He listened to her the way experienced people listen when someone younger knows something they need. Carefully, without condescension. With the attention of someone whose life depends on the information being right. Fuel pressure nominal. Ignition systems online. APU stable. Beginning engine start, Garrett said. The turbine came up from silence into a rising hum that built in the chest before you heard it in your ears. She had both hands on the external casing, eyes closed. 20%. 30. 40. She held it there in her hands, the vibration pattern, the frequency distribution. Her father had told her once that a perfectly aligned turbine shaft at operating speed produced a single clean tone in the structure of the machine. Not something you heard exactly. Something the body felt in the right place. She felt it. It was close. Not perfect, close. Reduced to 20 and hold, she said. Garrett reduced. There's a residual oscillation in the upper mounting, she said to Conrad, who was back at the gauge. Less than half a millimeter. I want to correct it. Will it affect airworthiness? At this level, probably not. She opened her eyes, but I know it's there, and I don't leave things I know are wrong. He looked at her for a moment, then put the gauge back in position without another word. Shut her down, she told Garrett. They were 40 minutes into the upper assembly correction when Dex Briggs stood up. She saw it from the corner of her eye. He'd been on the bench for over an hour, barely moving, in the stillness of someone waiting for news they're afraid to receive. He stood and walked toward Agent Draper. She watched him go. He talked to Draper for 4 minutes. She could see from his posture, from the way he held his hands, that he was telling her everything. The timeline, the calls, the instructions, what he'd done to the fuel line and exactly where and exactly how. Draper listened, made notes, asked 2 questions. Then she walked to the corner where Voss was standing. What she said to him, Zara couldn't hear, but she saw his face. And for the first time since he'd walked into the hangar, Ray Voss looked like a man who was running out of room. She went back to the upper mounting. The 5th layer came at 1:34 a.m. and it came from inside the engine. She'd moved on to the fuel system pressure test. Systematic. Start at the primary supply line. Work downstream. She was checking the manifold connections when she found the component. Pressure relief valve. Secondary circuit. It looked correct at a glance. Right position. Right general shape. She almost moved past it. Then she stopped. Something about the color of the metal was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Wrong the way a slightly off note is wrong in an otherwise correct chord. Once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. She removed it. Turned it in her hands. Compared it to the spec in her father's notebook. His diagrams were precise. He'd been that kind of man. The kind who drew things out exactly and labeled the measurements and kept records, not because anyone required it, but because accuracy was a form of respect, and he respected his work. The valve had the right form factor, same external dimensions, same connection type, different material. She could feel it in the weight, lighter than it should be by maybe 8%. An alloy that looked correct under normal lighting conditions. She got the UV penlight, scant surface. The material composition difference fluoresced faintly under UV in a way the original alloy wouldn't. She'd learned that from a materials science module during her 2nd year at Howard. Her father hadn't known about UV fluorescence testing. It was newer than his training. One of the few things she knew that he hadn't taught her. She thought he'd be pleased about that. She held the valve up and called to Conrad without looking away from it. "Come here." He was there in 4 seconds. "Look at this," she said. "Tell me, see what you see." He looked. "It looks like." He stopped. "It looks right." "Now look at it under this." She handed him the UV penlight. He scanned it, paused. The surface is fluorescing. It's a substitute component. Same form factor, different alloy. Lower temperature tolerance. She set it down on the clean cloth she'd spread on the equipment cart. At ground level and normal operating conditions, it performs identically to the original. You'd never know. But at cruise altitude, sustained high-temperature combustion, the material starts to fatigue approximately 4 to 6 hours into a long flight. She looked at him. It doesn't fail immediately. It fails gradually. The pressure relief circuit begins to malfunction. The combustion chamber starts running hotter than the monitoring systems expect because the valve that should regulate it is degrading. "What happens then?" She said it plainly. "Fire in the engine at altitude, over open country, very difficult to recover from." Conrad set the UV penlight down carefully on the cart, very carefully, like setting something fragile on a surface he wasn't sure would hold. "How many flight hours has this aircraft logged since its last major service?" he said. 62. "So if we'd flown tonight, you'd have been fine tonight. Probably for the next 3 or 4 flights. And then one night, somewhere over open ground, the valve would have failed, and the investigation afterward would have found a fatigued component. Wear and tear. A maintenance oversight. Not sabotage. Not obviously. No, he just sat down directly like his legs had made a decision his brain hadn't caught up to yet." She understood that. She gave him a moment. "Zara," he said. "Yeah. How many aircraft do we have in the active fleet?" She looked at him. 14, he said. 14 aircraft. 3 different maintenance facilities. Voss has had access to service records for all of them for 4 years. She looked at the substitute valve on the cloth. "We need to ground the fleet," she said. "Do you know what that does to the company?" "I know what a fatigued relief valve does at 35,000 feet. She met his eyes. She said, "Which one concerns you more?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and went to find his father. Draper came to her 10 minutes later while she was documenting the substitute component. "I need that valve," Draper said. "I know. I'm documenting it first." She didn't look up. "Chain of custody matters if you want this to hold up." Draper was quiet for a moment. "You've done evidence handling before." "No, but my father lost his job because of bad documentation in an internal investigation. Someone moved a component before it was properly logged, and the whole case fell apart." She took the last photograph, labeled the evidence bag, sealed it, handed it to Draper. "I know what happens when you skip steps." Draper took the bag, looked at it, then looked at Zara. "I'm to ask you something," she said. "Okay. The consulting firm that handled the safety audit at Harlan Aldridge's competitor 4 years ago, the one that resulted in 23 mechanics losing their positions and the facility closing down." She held the evidence bag. "Your father was one of those mechanics." "Yes. And you know that audit was run by Voss Aviation Consulting." "Conrad told me about 2 hours ago. And you've been standing in the same bay as Ray Voss for the last hour and 15 minutes. "Yes. How is that going for you?" Zara looked at the engine, at the tools, at the notebook sitting on the cart with her father's handwriting on every page. "I'm finishing the engine," she said. "That's what I'm here to do." Draper was quiet. "Then, 4 years ago, you filed a complaint with the FAA about the audit findings. I pulled the case file on the drive over. The complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated." Zara kept her eyes on the engine. "I know," she said. "He filed a second complaint 8 months later. Different division, also dismissed." "I know. He died 11 months after the second complaint was dismissed. Cardiac event, no insurance. He was 51 years old." She knew. She'd been there. She'd been 21 years old with $43 in her bank account in the middle of her junior year at Howard, and she'd gotten on a Greyhound bus from D.C. to Atlanta and sat next to a woman who talked about her grandchildren the entire way, and she'd been grateful for every word, because it kept her from having to think about where she was going and what would be waiting when she got there. "Miss Cole," Draper said. "I know," Zara said. "A different kind of knowing, the kind that sits in the chest and doesn't move." She picked up her wrench. "The fleet needs to be grounded tonight, Shiz. Can you make that happen?" If we have sufficient cause, you have a substitute component in that evidence bag, and 17 suppressed anomaly reports, and a mechanic who'll testify to everything he was asked to do. She looked at Draper. Is that sufficient? Draper looked at the evidence bag in her hand. I'll make some calls, she said. She found the fourth layer at 2:19 a.m. She'd been doing a final walk around Cystosomatic. Not because she expected to find anything else, because she'd told herself she wouldn't leave anything she hadn't checked. The nose gear bay. Something on the strut housing that didn't match the surface condition of the area around it. A section that looked recently touched versus sections that hadn't been. The kind of thing you notice when you've spent years looking at surfaces and understanding what handling leaves behind. She crouched, got the penlight close, a device. Small, matte black. Pressed into the junction of the hydraulic line and the strut housing with industrial adhesive. She did not touch it. She stood up slowly, backed out of the nose gear, bay carefully. I need Agent Draper, she said to the nearest person, who happened to be one of Finch's engineers. Right now, he went. She stood at the entrance to the nose gear bay and looked at the rest of the hangar, the lights, the people. Voss near the east wall, Dex on his bench. Conrad and Harlan near the records room. Finch at the diagnostic station, who glanced over at her and then looked quickly away. Someone had been in the nose gear bay while she was working on the engine. She thought about timing, about the window between when she'd sealed the fuel line and when she'd started on the shaft alignment. 40 minutes. She thought about who had been where. Then she thought about who had walked through the main bay doors at 11:52 p.m. and brought two people with them. Two people. She'd watched Voss carefully. She'd tracked one of his companions. That one had talked to Finch's engineers near the diagnostic station. She'd registered that. The other one, she thought back. The other one had drifted, past the wing, toward the nose. She had not tracked the second person closely enough. That was on her. Draper arrived in under a minute. They both looked at the device without touching it. That's not Dex Briggs's work, Draper said. No, Zara agreed. That's the backup plan. If everything else was found and corrected before the flight, this was supposed to handle the landing. She paused. Hydraulic failure on the nose gear at touchdown. At speed. She didn't elaborate. The elaboration wasn't necessary. Draper was already on her radio. Within 4 minutes, 2 more agents were in the bay. Voss's second companion was located near the south exit, not trying to leave, just standing in that particular stillness of someone deciding whether to run. He was walked to the east wall and seated next to Voss, less ceremony than Voss had received. Voss looked at him, and something broke in Voss's face for the first time all night. Not remorse, not surprise, just the expression of a man watching the last calculation fail. Zara watched it happen, then went back to work. At 2:44 a.m., Dex Briggs's phone rang. The number on the screen was the one they'd been waiting for. Draper was at his side in 3 seconds. He looked at her. She nodded once, he answered. Gave the update he'd been scripted to give. His voice was strained at the edges but held. He was better under pressure than she'd given him credit for. 9 years of maintenance work without complaint. He knew how to hold himself together when things were hard. He ended the call. Sandra Briggs' location was triangulated from the signal, a storage facility in West Houston, 22 minutes away. Draper had units moving in 4. They got Sandra out at 3:11 a.m. Draper got the confirmation on her radio and told Dex while he was still sitting on the bench where he'd been for the last hour. He didn't stand up. He stayed seated. His head went down, and his hands covered his face, and he was quiet in the way that people are quiet when the thing they've been holding themselves together for is finally over, and there's nothing left to hold. Zara was near the engine. She heard the radio confirmation from where she was standing. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Sandra Briggs was 36 years old, and she'd spent hours in a storage facility because her husband worked for a company that used a consulting firm run by a man who treated other people's lives as variables in a business calculation. She was fine. She would be fine. But fine and okay are different things, and okay takes a while. She thought about her father, about the months after the audit, about watching him sit at the kitchen table at night with complaint paperwork spread out in front of him and a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he kept forgetting it was there. He hadn't been fine for a long time either. She picked up the torque wrench, did the final check on the upper assembly. Perfect. She stepped back from the engine. looked at it the way she always looked at finished work. Not with pride, with assessment, making sure nothing was missed, making sure the work was the work needed to be. It was. She wrote the final measurements in the notebook. Then she looked up and found Conrad watching her from 10 feet away. Done, he said. Not a question this time. More like a statement he was testing for weight. This phase, she said, we still need the full pressure test. And I want to run a second partial start to verify the harmonic correction before I'll sign off. But the engine is safe, the fuel system is repaired and documented, the substitute component is in evidence. The device from the nose gear bay is in evidence. Everything that was done to this aircraft tonight has been found, documented, and corrected. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the engine the way he'd been looking at things all night, like he was learning to see them differently. You said this phase, he said. I think what happened here tonight is an example of something that's been happening in this industry for longer than one night, she said. Fixing this engine is the beginning of something, not the end. He looked at the hangar around them, at the agents, at his father talking quietly with Draper near the east wall, at Voss seated with his arms at his side, saying nothing, waiting for his lawyer. What do we do? He said. An actual question, directed at her. Now she closed her father's notebook. First, she said, we finish the work. She picked up the torque wrench. Then we talk about what comes next. The second start happened at 3:28 a.m. The hangar had thinned out by then. Finch's engineers had been asked to wait in the crew lounge while agents processed the bay. 2 of them had left entirely, which Draper noted without comment. Voss was seated near the east wall with an agent beside him, his expensive coat still dry, his expression the careful blankness of a man who has decided that silence is his best remaining asset. His companion from the nose gear bay was in a separate vehicle outside. Zazara didn't look at Voss. She'd made a decision about that somewhere around 2:30 a.m. Looking at him was his energy she needed elsewhere. She ran through the pre-start checklist with Garrett a second time. He didn't rush her. He had the patience of someone who understood that thoroughness and slowness are not the same thing, and she liked him better for it. Ready when you are, he said. Fuel pressure, nominal, ignition systems, online, APU stable. She put both hands flat on the engine casing, closed her eyes, begin start. Bring it to 40% and hold. The turbine came up through the frequencies she'd memorized over the last 4 hours, 20%. 30, 40. She held herself very still. Hands flat, not pressing, just there, the way her father had taught her. Don't try to feel anything, just let your hands be there. The harmonic was different from the first partial start. Different in the right direction. The residual oscillation she'd corrected in the upper assembly was gone. The frequency distribution was clean. Not almost clean. Clean. She counted 8 seconds of it to be certain. Cut to idle, she said. Then shut her down. The turbine wound back through the frequencies and went quiet. She took her hands off the casing and turned around. Harlan Aldridge was standing 15 feet away. He'd been there for the entire start. She hadn't heard him come in. He had that quality, moving without announcing himself, and she suspected it had served him well over 60 years. Well, yet, he said. The harmonic correction held, she said. Upper and lower assemblies are in spec. Fuel system is clean. Pressure relief valve has been replaced with a correctly spec'd component from your parts inventory. I confirmed the material composition before installation. She paused. I want a full pressure test on the fuel system before anyone signs a maintenance release. That's another 40 minutes. But the engine is airworthy. He looked at the engine for a moment, then at her. You've been doing this for 6 hours, I said. 5.5, and you haven't sat down. I'll sit down when it's finished. He was quiet. She picked up the pressure test equipment and got back to work. The pressure test was methodical, and she did most of it alone. Conrad stayed nearby. He didn't help. This part didn't need 2 people, but he stayed. She found she didn't mind. He had the uncommon quality of being present without needing to fill the space with himself. Most people couldn't do that. Most people got uncomfortable with quiet and started talking to fix it. Conrad just stood there, watching, learning. She could tell the difference between someone watching to kill time and someone watching because they were genuinely trying to understand something. At 3:47 a.m., her phone vibrated. She'd given Draper her number 2 hours ago. She looked at the screen, a text. 4 words. Fleet grounded. Pont back in her pocket. Working. Conrad had seen her check it. What did it say? The fleet's been grounded, all of them. All 14. She could feel him doing the arithmetic, contracts, clients, revenue, logistics, the particular math of a grounded fleet that she had no framework for and didn't need one. How long, he said, until each aircraft is individually inspected. Fuel systems, pressure relief circuits, hydraulic assemblies. She checked the manifold reading. Depending on what they find, could be days, could be longer. He leaned against the equipment stand, looked at the ceiling for a moment. My father built this company in 14 years. Started with 2 aircraft and a maintenance contract at a regional airport in Georgia. Everything he has is in this operation. I know. And you still called for the fleet to be grounded. She checked secondary circuit reading. Nominal. Moved to the next connection. Your father hired a man to oversee the safety of his aircraft, she said. That man spent 4 years learning the operation from the inside, the fleet schedule, the maintenance windows, the crew rotations, the service records. He used all of it. She moved to the next connection. If one of those 14 aircraft has a modified component and it flies before anyone checks, and it fails, that's not a business problem. That's a criminal outcome. Your father built something real. Real things deserve to survive intact, not patched over. He looked at her for a long time. You sounds like him sometimes, he said. My father, when he was younger, before this became about keeping what he'd built instead of building something worth keeping. She turned back to the pressure test. Tell him that, she said. Not me. The pressure test completed clean at 4:11 a.m. She stood back from the engine for the last time and looked at it the way she'd looked at it 6 hours ago from 28 feet away with a mop handle in her hands. Different now. She knew every part of it. She knew what had been done to it and what she'd done to undo it. She knew its sound and its temperature distribution and specific frequency of its corrected harmonic. She picked up her father's notebook, wrote the final entry, full pressure test complete, all systems nominal. Fuel system integrity confirmed, shaft alignment within spec, harmonic signature clean, engine airworthy. Then his notation system at the bottom, the one he'd developed over 22 years. Date, time, Texness signature. She wrote her name in the space where his would have been. For a moment, she just looked at it, her name, his handwriting around it, his system, his notebook. She closed it. Across the bay, Dr. Finch had come back from the crew lounge. She hadn't been told he'd return. He was standing near the diagnostic station, maybe 30 feet away, watching her. When she looked up and saw him standing there, he didn't say anything. He looked at the engine for a long moment. Then he turned and began quietly collecting his equipment. Folding cables, closing cases, the specific tidying of a man who understood that the night had ended in a way he hadn't expected and was processing that privately. She didn't say anything to him either. There wasn't anything that needed saying. Draper found her at 4:19 m, sitting on the bottom step of the air stair that had been pushed against the fuselage. It was the first time she'd sat down since 9:47 p.m. Everything ached that physical work produces when you stop moving. Not injury, just the body registering what it had been asked to do over 6 hours and presenting the bill. Draper sat down on the step beside her, uninvited but not unwelcome. Sandra Briggs is at a hospital in West Houston, she said. Precautionary. She's not injured. Her husband is with her. Good. I thought you'd want to know. I did, thank you. Draper was quiet for a moment. The hangar was almost silent now. The overnight maintenance crew had been able to say until the scene was cleared. Gerald at the security desk was presumably still with his paperback. The overhead floods were still blazing at full power over an engine that was finally after everything ready. Voss is invoking counsel, Draper said, which is his right. His associate has been more forthcoming. We have enough for charges tonight. More will develop as we process the devices and components. She paused. The substitute sells the strongest piece. Material forensics will take time, but the form factor deviation alone is documentable. The C serial number on the substitute component was removed, Zara said, but the original component it replaced should still be logged in the maintenance records. Part number, lot number, installation date. That gives you the procurement chain. Draper looked at her. You thought of that already. About 10 minutes ago, actually. Still, she made a note. The maintenance binders have been collected as evidence. We'll cross-reference. Zara nodded. Miss Cole. Draper's tone shifted, still professional. but adjacent to something else. The FAA complaint your father filed 4 years ago. I know about it. The second complaint he filed 8 months later was routed to a division that had a contract relationship with Voss Aviation Consulting, an oversight assessment contract, renewed annually. She paused. That's a conflict of interest that was not disclosed at the time of the dismissal. Zara was very still. Both complaints will be reopened, Draper said. I can't make promises about outcome, but they'll be reopened with the Numza text of what we're finding tonight. What Briggs has told us. What the devices and components will tell the forensic team. She stopped, then said it plainly. Your father's complaint may have been accurate. About all of it. She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at the hangar floor, at the scuff marks from 6 hours of tools and people, and the evidence of a night that wasn't supposed to go this way. He knew it was accurate, she said. He knew from the day they dismissed it. He just couldn't prove it without access to the things that would prove it. I know. He died trying to prove it. I know. She pressed her back against the fuselage. The metal was solid behind her, cold through her jacket. Then do what you can with it, she said. That's all I can ask. Draper nodded once, closed her notebook. Then, before she stood, she said one more thing. There's someone outside who'd like to speak with you, Judge May Collins. She drove in from Sugarland when I called her at 4:30. She says she knew your father. Zara looked at her. She's been waiting in the parking lot for 40 minutes, Draper said. Wouldn't come in until you were done with the engine. Said she didn't want to distract you. Zara absorbed that. Then she stood up from the air stair and walked toward the side exit. The rain had stopped. She pushed through the side door and stood under the broken overhang of the east entrance where she'd stood at 9:47 p.m., which was 6 hours and 22 minutes ago, which felt both like a week and like no time at all, and looked at the parking lot. The sky in the east had changed. Not light yet, but not the full dark of midnight either. The particular blue that happens in the hour before dawn when the night starts losing confidence. Dark blue sedan was parked 3 spaces from her car. Practical. The kind of car that belongs to someone who stopped caring about appearances a long time ago and replaced concern with something more useful. The woman who got out moved with a cane, but moved like the cane was a choice rather than a requirement. She was a 6'5", and she looked like someone who had decided at some point to be formidable and had simply never reversed that decision. She just looked at Zara. You look like your father, she said. People say that. It's true. I knew James for almost 20 years. Met him when he was doing maintenance on my husband's Cessna, back when he was still working the regional circuit before he moved up to the larger facilities. She came to stand beside her under the overhang, looked at the parking lot the way people look at things when they're really thinking at something else. I heard about tonight. Faye called me at 4:30. I didn't know you knew Agent Draper. I know a lot of people. That's what 40 years on the bench produces. Connections you didn't plan for and some you wish you didn't have. She looked sideways at Zara. I also knew about your father's complaints. I didn't know about the conflict of interest in the review division. I do now. Zara didn't say anything. When the complaints are reopened, Judge Collins said, there will be a process. It'll be slow. Federal processes are always slow. There will be documentation requests and interviews and delays that feel designed to make you give up. She paused. They're not designed for that. They're just designed by humans, and humans design things that reflect their limitations. I know. Your father was patient for 8 months and then ran out of time. She looked at Zara steadily. You are 22 years old. You have considerably more runway. I'm not giving up, Zara said. I didn't think so. The judge shifted the cane slightly. I'm going to assign myself as your legal advocate through the complaint review process. Retired judges can still do useful things. That's one of them. She paused. This isn't charity. Your father's case has implications for regulatory practice in this industry that extend well beyond one's employment record. I'm doing this because it matters. But also, another pause, shorter. Because James Cole was a goobson who deserved better, and his daughter just spent 6 hours proving it in a way that no complaint filing ever quite managed. Zaz looked at her. The judge looked back without blinking. Okay, Zara said. The judge nodded once. The matter settled itself. Go finish what's left inside, she said. I'll be here. Harlan Aldridge found her 20 minutes later. She'd moved back from the air stair to the equipment cart, where she was repacking her father's tools. The leather roll her father had bought from a hardware store because it was on sale and he'd never found a reason to replace it. The wrench handles worn smooth where his hands had held them thousands of times, the UV pen light, the feeler gauges, the small tube of repair compound that had been in the bottom of her bag for 8 months without her knowing when she'd use it. She knew now. Harlan sat down on the equipment cart across from her, not something she'd expected from him. He had the manner of a man who hadn't sat on an equipment cart in a very long time and was doing it deliberately. "The engine is done," she said before he could speak. "Conrad told me. I'll write a full maintenance report for your records and for the FAA. Every finding, every correction, every measurement. Chain of custody for all components removed as evidence. It'll take a few hours, but I want to do it while everything is clear in my head." "Zaza," he said. She looked up. "Name a number," he said. She looked at him. "Whatever you think is appropriate," he said. "For tonight, for what you found and what you prevented." He paused. "I'm not a man who doesn't settle his debts." She folded the leather roll, set it down. "I don't want money," she said. "Everyone, I want 2 things," she said. "And neither of them is money." He waited. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "I have 1 year left at Howard, aerospace engineering. I left because I couldn't pay for it. I want to go back and finish." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to pay for it out of generosity. I'm asking because I did work tonight that your credentialed team couldn't do, and I want the credential to go with the work. Because I've learned that without the piece of paper, the next time I walk into a room like this one, I'll spend 2 hours convincing people I belong here before they'll let me near the engine." Harlan was quiet. "And the second thing," she said, "an internal maintenance review board. Independent, staffed by field technicians, the people who actually put their hands on the aircraft, not the managers above them. With the authority to flag concerns directly to the FAA without going through the company's operational chain first." She paused. "The anomalies Dex logged were suppressed because he had no channel that bypassed the people who wanted them suppressed. Give your crew a channel that can't be suppressed. The board would be expensive to run properly," he said. "Less expensive than 14 grounded aircraft, and considerably less expensive than a crash investigation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father, James Cole. He worked at the Hartsfield facility before the audit. 22 years. I knew of him by reputation. Good mechanics are known in this industry, even when they don't advertise themselves." He paused. "When the Voss audit came out and the facility closed, I heard about it from a distance. I thought it was a regulatory matter. That's what it looked like. That's what it was designed to look like," she said. "Yes." He looked at the engine. "I understand that now. And I understand that 4 months later I hired the man responsible for it without knowing what I was bringing into this operation." "I believe you didn't know," she said, "because she did. Voss was good at what he did. That was the entire problem." "The board," Harlan said, "I'll establish it by the end of the week. Agent Draper has offered to advise on the structural requirements. I want you on the founding committee. I'll still be an overnight technician without a degree. You'll be the person who saved this aircraft and documented the crime committed against it with a notebook, a UV pen light, and 11 months of learning this hangar from the floor up." He paused. "I think we can work around the credential issue for a committee seat." She looked at him. "Howard," he said, "I'll contact their financial aid office this week. The scholarship will be structured as a professional development grant, not charity. You'll document your fieldwork as part of the arrangement and contribute to their practical curriculum. You give them your knowledge. They give you the piece of paper." He paused. "Fair trade." She looked at the leather tool roll in her hands, her father's tools inside it. She thought about him at the kitchen table with the complaint paperwork spread out in front of him, the cold coffee. It's a specific exhaustion of a man who was right and couldn't make anyone believe it, who had filed 2 complaints and been dismissed and then run out of time for the 3rd try. "Okay," she said, "just that." 1 word. Harlan stood from the equipment cart, straightened his jacket. "I'll need that maintenance report by end of business Thursday. You'll have it Wednesday night." He looked at her. "You don't need to, Wednesday," she said. "I want it done right." He almost smiled. The same almost that Conrad had produced earlier. She was beginning to understand it was a family trait that showed up when they encountered something they hadn't expected and didn't quite know what to do with. He walked away to the eastward wall, where Draper was waiting with more questions. Voss spoke as she was passing. She hadn't planned to walk near him, but the path from the equipment cart to the side exit crossed within 12 feet of where he was seated, and she wasn't going to reroute herself around him. Miss Cole. She stopped, turned. He was still seated. The agent beside him was watching. Draper was on the far side of the bay, but her eyes came over immediately. Voss looked at her, for the first time all night, with something that might have been, in a different man, a kind of acknowledgement. "Your father knocked on the same door," he said. "You know where that got him." She looked at him. She thought about everything she could say, every version of what this moment could be. Then she thought about her father. Not the end of him. Not the kitchen table and the cold coffee and the slow, terrible cost of being right in a room full of people who had decided not to believe him. She thought about the beginning. The garage in Decatur. Saturday mornings, his hands on the engine block, her small hand next to his, Zara. She looked at Voss. "He taught me to knock louder," she said. She walked to the side door and pushed through it. Conrad caught her in the parking lot. She was halfway to her car when she heard him behind her. He was still in the clothes he'd been wearing all night. No jacket, despite the cold that had settled after the rain. "Zara?" She turned. He walked up and stood a few feet away. He looked tired. Not the physical tired of having been awake all night. The other kind. The kind that comes from seeing something about the world you were living in that you can't unsee. "I signed the documentation for the board," he said, "before my father. I didn't want to wait for the lawyers to finish reviewing the language." She looked at him. "I've been waiting 5 years to do something I actually chose," he said. "Something that wasn't just continuing what already existed." He paused. "It's just a signature on a document at 5 in the morning. But it's enough," she says. He nodded. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. What did you hear? The first time you put your hands on the engine and closed your eyes. What did it actually feel like?" She thought about it honestly. "Wrong," she said. "It felt wrong the way a sentence feels wrong when a word is missing. Everything else is there. The structure is there. But the subdip stump should it be, and once you feel the gap, you can't unfeel it." He nodded slowly. "My father says I don't have an instinct for this business," he said. "That I calculate instead of know." "Calculating isn't wrong," she said. "You need both. People who only calculate miss what I found tonight. People who only know." She stopped, thought about her father, about the distance between what he knew and what he could prove. They sometimes can't make anyone believe them. The credential matters, the calculation matters. They just can't be the only things. He thought about that. "What do you actually do next?" he said. "After tonight. I go homes, sleep, write the maintenance report, call Howard. She paused. "Then I come back here and finish what I started. Cleaning floors. Learning aircraft," she said. "The floors were how I paid for the education." He looked at her for a moment. Then he put out his hand. She shook it. Not a dramatic gesture. Not a ceremony. Just two people who had spent a night working on the same problem from different angles, acknowledging that the problem was solved. He went back inside. She walked to her car. She sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine. The lot was quiet. Draper's car. Harlan's car with the driver asleep in the front. Her own car sitting between two maintenance vehicles, still wet from the rain that had stopped while she's inside, not noticing it. She opened her father's notebook, sat with it in her lap. The pages were heavy with 22 years of accumulated knowing. His handwriting specific and economical. He'd written the way he'd worked. No wasted motion. Every mark intentional. Diagrams that looked cool until you understood them, and then became precise in a way that was almost elegant. She turned to the last page, the one she'd added her final entry to, the completion of the maintenance log. Her name in the space where his would have been. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned past it to the page after. The one that was blank had always been blank. The last page of his notebook, the one he'd never gotten to fill. She took out a pen, thought about what he'd say, what he'd want her to write, what the next true thing was. She wrote 3 sentences. She didn't write them for anyone else. She wrote them because they were the next things in the notebook, and the notebook was where true things went. She closed it, started the car. The drive home on the 610 was empty at that hour, which she'd been thinking about at 9:47 p.m. When she pushed through the side entrance of Hangar B, she'd been thinking about the drive home. about the leftover rice in her fridge, about the hole in her boot sole she'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. The boot had gotten wet, as expected. The sole had held. The hole was small and fixable with the right adhesive. She'd do it today. She drove past her usual exit without noticing and kept going for 2 miles before she caught herself and laughed. Out loud in an empty car on an empty highway. The laugh of someone who has been doing something with complete focus for 6 hours and has suddenly stopped and doesn't quite know what to do with all the attention that was just being used somewhere else. She took the next exit. Home was a 1-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better decades but was structurally sound and had good water pressure and a window in the kitchen that caught the morning light in a way she'd noticed on her 3rd day and hadn't stopped noticing since. She parked, sat in the lot for a moment. The sky was lighter now. Not light, but lighter. The blue-black of an hour ago had softened into something that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. She thought about the engine. The way it had sounded in the final partial start, the clean harmonic, the absence of the oscillations she'd found and corrected, the rightness of metal in proper alignment. Her father had called it the chord that isn't a chord. The thing a well-maintained machine produces that you feel before you hear. She'd felt it at 3:39 m, with her hands flat on a Gulfstream G700 that someone had tried to turn into a murder. She thought, I'll feel it again. She thought, I'll feel it better next time because I'll have the credential to go with the hands and the notebook and the 6 years of learning that don't show up on any resume. She thought, and let herself think it fully and without qualification. Dad, I heard it. I heard the chord. The rice had turned. She threw it out, made toast, sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of a city just beginning to wake up, with the toast and a glass of water and her father's notebook on the table in front of her. She didn't open it. She just ate the toast, looked at the notebook, thought about a review board where field technicians could flag concerns that couldn't be suppressed. About 14 grounded aircraft being inspected by people who knew what to look for and understood why it mattered. About Dex Briggs at a hospital in West Houston sitting next to his wife who was 36 years old and had never done anything to anyone and was going to be okay. About a blank page with 3 sentences that she'd written in the parking lot before dawn. She'd written, "The engine is fixed. The complaints will be reopened. I'm still here. Not for posterity. Not for anyone else to read. Just because they were the next true things and the notebook was where true things went." She finished the toast, put the plate in the sink, picked up the notebook and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it the way she'd felt the weight of the substitute valve in her hands. At 1:34 a. Her father had carried this notebook to work every day for 22 years. It had been in his bag when he was called into the manager's office and told that the Voss audit had found irregularities in his maintenance records. It had been in his bag on the day he walked out of that facility for the last time. It had been on the kitchen table, next to the complaint paperwork, during all those nights, with the cold coffee and the reading glasses and the slow accumulation of a case that 2 different divisions had decided not to hear. He'd left it to her. Not the house, which was rented. Not the car, which was old and sold to cover what the insurance didn't. Not money, because there wasn't any. Just the notebook, and the knowledge of how to use what was in it. She set it gently on the counter next to her keys, went to her bedroom and lay down without changing clothes, and was asleep in approximately 4 minutes. Outside the window, the Houston sky moved from gray into the pale gold of early morning. The color that settles over every city equally, regardless of what happened there the night before. The color that doesn't ask what you've been through, just arrives, just begins. She slept, and the engine she had fixed sat silent in Hangar B, cooling in the specific way that metal cools after it's been running, contracting slowly back toward room temperature, every component in its correct position. Every system documented, verified, signed, ready. When the time came, ready to carry whoever was on that flight manifest safely from one place to another, the way an aircraft is supposed to, the way it would have if someone hadn't decided that the lives of the people inside it were worth less than a business outcome. That ought Zara Koble had gone into Hangar B at 9:47 p.m. to prevent. That was what she had done. The notebook on her kitchen counter held the record of how. And the last page of that notebook, the one her father had never gotten to fill, now had 3 sentences in her handwriting. The engine is fixed. The complaints will be reopened. I'm still here. 3 true things. In the place where true things went. The morning came in through the kitchen window the way it always did. And outside, the city woke up and the day began. And somewhere in West Houston, a woman named Sandra Briggs walked out of a hospital with her husband beside her and looked up at a sky that was the same sky it had always been. Clear, after rain. End of part 3. End of The Weight of Knowing.